Welcome to Goldfish on Games, where it turns out the McIntyre isn't even in its final form. So I hope you're ready for a bit of a crossover episode as we look at this machine from the Gold Scrap episode and the McIntyre which we've seen previously, and we're going to mix and match some hardware to end up with the best 486 that I can. Our first job is going to be to extract the motherboard from the Gold Scrap machine. We're not going to use this case, mostly because it's missing the front door and the side panels, so this case is pretty much junk. Plus, I get the feeling we're going to have to replace this battery. So let's get to it, shall we? And before you know it, it's free of the case. And now we have a motherboard that's pretty much ready to be worked on. And just look at it. This is surprisingly clean for a machine that's this old and has been sat in an office. Our first port of call on any old bit of hardware is the battery. So let's check it out. And with us zoomed in, we can see it's one of these ones that supposedly don't leak, which is a good thing. But let's see if it's got any power, and barely 0.5 of a volt. Yep, that has to get pulled out. Now unfortunately, I managed to misplace my footage of replacing the battery, so you're just going to have to see what it looked like afterwards. Though it does mean you've probably been saved from seeing some of the worst soldering work on YouTube. And with that work complete, it's time to dismantle the McIntyre. First job is to take out all the cards. Though I will continue to use the modern power supply and this harness, as the PSU on the other machine is a little bit loud and grindy. And with the final plastic clip giving up, we finally get this motherboard out. And if we look underneath, we can see the patchwork that I had to do to get the keyboard to work again. Yep, that still looks ugly. Surprisingly, the first thing I actually wanted to do was make sure I got the LCD panel right, because if that doesn't show the right number, then why even bother doing all of this? The one on the McIntyre is its own self-contained little unit, so it easily just pops out. And here it is in all its glory, but all the important stuff is on the back. Just look at all those jumpers. For those of you who don't know, the numbers that you see on the front of these LCD panels are actually controlled directly via these jumpers. The motherboard does not pass any information onto this device at all. There is just a simple cable that goes from this to the motherboard that tells it whether or not it's in turbo or normal mode, with the motherboard knowing which values it should be running. Unsurprisingly, the jumper settings are pretty specific to the device, though thankfully I managed to find a schematic for a very similar model. So if you look at the bottom, we have this grid, and it tells us the exact set of jumpers we need to set to get the two numbers, the normal and the turbo. In this instance we need 33 and 66. So if we look up those values, we find we need to set this set of jumpers. And because it's using the same number for both, we only need to look up one value, which is pretty nice. This is actually a bit like one of those puzzles you get in an adventure game. So if we look at this board, the top row sets the 1 digit and the bottom row sets the 10 digit. So we want to set them both to be 3 and 6. So with the guide next to me, it was time to start placing these jumpers. And it went reasonably well, though trying to read some of the smaller numbers on this badly photocopied sheet wasn't easy. And trying to work out exactly which of the pins actually matched was also a bit fiddly. But overall, it was reasonably straightforward. And with the 6 and the 3 done, it was time to set the 60 and the 30, which means we had to put the exact same set of jumpers into the bottom row. And with that done, it was time to try it out with some power. So I turned the machine on and hey, we have a 66. And if we press the turbo button, let's see what happens. It goes to 33. Yay, we have both values that we wanted. Now the turbo light won't light up because that actually comes from a pin on the motherboard. And with the jumpers set correctly, it was time to put the module back inside the case, which it did with a couple of clips. And now it was time to start putting the machine back together again. So in goes the Gold Scrap motherboard, sporting its 66MHz 486. And with that in place, it was the bane of any system builder's existence, setting up the front panel pins. First goes the speaker, then the power LED, which wasn't labelled on the board, then it was the reset switch, then the turbo LED, and then finally the turbo switch itself, The header only has 2 pins, but the connector has 3, so I had to take a guess at which way round it was meant to go. And let's see if I got this right. Oh, turbo is showing, and we're on 33 MHz, that doesn't look good, and it's going at full speed, and I turn it off and it goes half speed. Yep, I've got that connector the wrong way round. Though thankfully, it is a quick and simple fix. Take out the connector, spin it round, and put it back in again. Now let's test this out again. Well, the turbo LED is on, and it's showing 66 MHz, and it's sounding the fast memory check, and I turn it off, and it slows it down. So yep, this is right. So it's time to start putting some hardware in this, and we start with the VGA card. Now I picked the card from the McIntyre because I knew it worked pretty well and it has enough RAM to do what I need it to do. And I put it into the bottom slot because that seems to be where they've always gone in every other 486 I've worked with. Next up is the I/O card. Now I've taken the one from the gold scrap machine, mostly because I like the look of it, and I was hoping the fact that it used the extra pins meant that it might be a bit quicker. Now this has serial, floppy, IDE, as well as parallel and game port on it, if I connect those up later. And with a bit of effort, it slots in. And I'll continue to pair that up with an IDE to compact flash card adapter, with a 1GB compact flash card in it. This one has a bracket so I can actually fit it to the back of the case, which makes it much easier for taking it out and adding more software to the machine. And with that in place, all there's left is to wire it all up. And with all that in place, it was time to boot it up. And it's always nice to get something on the monitor on first try. And it doesn't take long until we're in the BIOS, the very pink and very primary colour BIOS. This obviously was designed with CGA in mind. Now the first thing we have to do on any machine is set the clock. Now amazingly, this does actually go all the way up to 2019, which was quite surprising considering how widespread the Y2K bug was meant to have been. And with that done, it's time to see if it will detect the hard drive. And hey, picked it up first time. We're on a bit of a roll here. So yep, we just have to accept those parameters. It will try to detect another drive, which there isn't, so we'll select no. And then we can just write to CMOS and reboot. And if we're lucky, we'll actually boot into MS-DOS. And as we go through post yet again, thankfully we can hit escape, which will speed up the memory check. But after that, hopefully, fingers crossed, hey, it's booting MS-DOS. It fails to find the sound card, which is not entirely surprising considering it's not even plugged in. It also fails to find a CD-ROM drive, for very similar reasons. But let's have a quick look to see if anything runs. The first thing I'm going to try is edit, as I had a whole bunch of issues with the mouse on the previous machine. And hey, look at that. That looks pretty nice. So I'm pretty happy already. So with the basic machine looking pretty good, it's time to connect the other hardware, including the CD-ROM drive, which first of all we get the audio cable, then the IDE, and then power. Next up is the floppy cable, which we have to make sure we put it in the right way around in the floppy drive. And yep, come on, fit in, and there we go. And then we just got to give it some power after we tidy up the cables. And finally, it's the sound card, a Sound Blaster 16. First job is to connect that audio cable from the CD-ROM drive, and then it just slots in quite nicely. And with all the cards in place, all that's left is to connect it up. So we've got VGA, keyboard, sound, mouse, and power. And we have something on the monitor, which again is a great sight to see after you've done a load of work. And now it's time to see if it detects any of the new hardware. And first up should be the sound card, and yep, it's picked that up quite nicely. And the CD-ROM drive seems to be detected as well. Very nice. Thumbs up all round. So, and let's try booting a game that wouldn't have run all that well on the previous machine, and it has to be Doom, which already seems to be loading a lot faster than it did before. But that shouldn't come as a shock, seeing that we're now running a full fat 486 and got an extra 41 MHz. And Oh, in-game, that's almost buttery smooth. Very nice. Now if we contrast that with the previous machine, we can seriously see the difference here. Yep, it's night and day. But before we play around with too many games, we gotta replace that heatsink and fan, or this chip might get a bit toasty. First things first was to replace the fan. Thankfully, a modern 40mm will replace it quite easily. And after clearing a bit of space in the case, we managed to get this fan put in place. Now it just clips in, though I did use a bit of extra thermal grease just to make sure it stuck to it. And I had to use a Molnex to 3-pin connector as well, so we could actually power it. But with everything back in place, let's see if it runs. Awesome, that should keep it nice and cool for the games that we're about to try out. First up is Descent, and even on the full-fat 486 DX266, it's not exactly a totally smooth experience. But with a simple press of the turbo button, we can actually see what it would have ran like on the 486 SX25, and boy, it looks absolutely terrible. So let's return it to having the full 66MHz CPU to work with, shall we? Much better. One of the games I really wanted to test on this machine is Commander Keen 4. The reason for this is that it actually runs pretty poorly on my Pentium machine. The scrolling is really jerky, and I end up having to use a patched Xe for it to become smooth, where it just looks absolutely smooth and beautiful on this machine with absolutely no additional effort. And talking of games that don't like particularly new hardware, or at least new at the time, we have Desert Strike. For some reason, if I play this on my Pentium 200, this game will end up having corrupted audio. But, as we can tell, it sounds absolutely perfect on the 486. So this will be the machine I end up playing this game on, if I don't want to play it on the Amiga, the Mega Drive, the SNES. And there's some games that even this machine seems way too modern, such as Wing Commander, which even from the intro we can tell it's running a little bit too fast. This is it running on the 66MHz mode. Now let's try playing a quick round in the training simulator, and wow, it's just pretty much game over straight away. So let's try this again, slowing the machine down to 25MHz, which doesn't really change the speed of the animations on this screen, so hopefully it will still change it for in-game. And let's see if this is any better. Oh, much better. This is actually playable now. Though, in some ways I don't know, because it was running it faster, it feels bits too slow. But this is far closer to the spec of the machine that was expected at the time. So remember developers, if you're not going to cap your frame rate, please don't tie it to the update thread as well, because you'll end up with this, a game that plays way too fast when you give it faster hardware. And there we go, the machine I said wouldn't be upgraded has been upgraded. But I think you'll agree with me, it's been worth it. So until next time, I've been the Goldfish, that is the McIntyre's final form, I promise, and this was Goldfish on Games. Goodbye. Thank you for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, all that really fun stuff that makes you seem so much cooler to your friends.